now your host.
Welcome to Yes I'm Rosin. This is Crystal Cavalier Keck, Red Bear, and we have Jason Crazy Bear here with us today. Makutamin Chin Kyohei, no home PP say, Mima Crystal, Mima Okanichi, Saponi, Watiwa.
Alito Chima Chukma Yakuke Ishto, Chatasia Oklasia, Anakma Abinoke.
So thank you guys so much for listening in to our radio podcast here on WKBY. And we want to talk to you guys about two things that are coming up. One is we have an event tonight. It is through the American Indian Movement, 17 Rivers, North Carolina chapter. Then we have Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, the Return of the Red Hawks, and 7 Directions of Service. We are all co-hosting this land back discussion on this day of action. And we wanted to encompass what that means, because if you've been in mainstream media or if you've been listening or on Facebook, you've seen these hashtags or pound signs. They say words like land back. And we want to talk about what does that look like here on the East Coast? How does that look in North Carolina? And the slogan is a literal call for the return of native lands to native peoples. And it's a profound summation of anti-colonial thought, right? Land back is a war cry for the liberation of indigenous people in our land. And it's a pathway forward. And that was quoted from Nick Tilson, president and CEO of Indian Collective. So tonight we have a whole host of people here on the East Coast. We have Lance, Red Hawk, we have Caribou Boyd, and then we have Pure Faye. And they're just going to talk about how does that look for us here in North Carolina and Virginia. And then tomorrow night we have an event. It's called Black Indigenous People of Color Racial Healing. And it's going to be presented by myself, Lashana, and Jason. And Lashana is an African-American woman here in Alamance County. And we've been working together over the last 3 years to talk about racism, racial equity, and a racial healing. And tomorrow is the National Day of Racial Healing. And that centers around experiences rooted in truth-telling, offering people, organizations, and communities a day set aside for racial healing, bringing people together to take collective action for a more just and equitable world. And so why is it important? Well, racial healing matters. It helps affirm the inherent value of all people and organizations and communities. It cultivates a culture of belonging that can advance racial equity and inclusion. And it deepens our understanding of the differences and opportunities, burdens, and needs that exist related to how people racially and ethically identify. And this is for everybody. This is for white, Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian. This is for everybody. And one way to participate in this National Day of Racial Healing is to invite friends and family and colleagues and neighbors to a virtual or in-person gathering to start a conversation. So Lashana, Jason, and I, we decided to do this virtually because, COVID it's kind of ramping up and things are kind of scary. And so you can find these, you can actually come on Facebook and you can just look up 7 Directions of Service. That is our Facebook page. That's the number 7 Directions of Service, and you'll find our events. You can also go to 17 Rivers, North Carolina, and you can also just look that up, 17 Rivers, North Carolina, AIM, American Indian Movement page, and you can find that. Or you can just call me at 336-530-0930 and leave a message, and I will call you back and let you know. So that number is 336-530-0930, and I can give you those details. Next on our agenda is we want to talk about this conversation that we had on Friday, and we want to apologize for the irregularity of our show. Jason and I have gotten so busy in the last 8 months. We went on the Red Road to DC. We traveled all across the United States to different indigenous communities, Native nations, to see, their sacred places and how they're protecting them. And it was a real wonderful trip. Even during this time of COVID, we were very safe, but we were able to see how environmental racism affects them and how the similarities are the same here on the East Coast. Jason?
So basically, we realized that we could have had a microphone with us and we could have had shows going on, but we just got, caught up in all of these things, fighting for environmental justice, fighting for racial justice, fighting for equity justice, fighting for poverty justice. And so, it dawned on us Friday night, we were on a call still discussing this MVP pipeline that was deemed, at least its compressor station placement was deemed racially unjust. And now they're suing that decision. I think I told somebody that was discussing it with me, a lot of our biased, convicted relatives would probably love the ability to be able to sue decisions against them and incarcerations they may have faced just simply because of poverty and not having good legal representation. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, we're on this call Friday, and as I was asked to close the call with some words, I remembered, this is the week that we do every year. We do a honoring of Martin Luther King Jr. Days of Action, Days of Service, and we've been honoring that since we've been together. And it just dawned on me that somebody said, the Friday call is a little difficult. And I said, well, the Friday call might be difficult going into the weekend, but this is the weekend of service. This is the weekend of action to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I want to wish everybody a happy Monday in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. And these invitations my wife has put out are just actions. Nobody said the actions have to end the day. If you neglected to do any service or actions last week, you can put them forward and do them this week. And actions look anything like donating cans at a food drive, donating warm coats. Now that we got actual winter over here on the Southeast, actions are anything that you could think of to move the justice ball forward. And so it just inspired us to get back on here, do a radio show. I realized this is a platform to educate. And so, it might be small. It might just be to one or a couple communities. If you had a capacity to record this or share this or just tell people about it so that they come to future ones. We're just trying to educate in a way that, that there seems to be a resistance to us thinking about and resisting these things, that are still prevalent. And me personally, I think about Dr. King's sacrifice and that he gave his life for a change and a freedom and a liberation. And every time I see that moving slow nowadays, I get a little pain inside. It feels like ignoring his sacrifice. And then I just turn that around into inspiration and I do my best. So this is my best, trying to speak to you, educate you, get you off the couch and realize that this brother sacrificed for us all two-legged people. You know what I'm saying? And thank you for listening.
So thank you so much for listening. It is our thing to just educate the community. I moved home. You guys know that 5 years ago. Well, actually 6 years ago now, from Washington, D.C. I was an intelligence analyst for the government. And, I moved home to help my daughter and my family. And I just want to be able to give back to the community that I grew up in and I lived in. And during that, I've had an awakening and an education process of, what my ancestors and relatives did to protect us. That was meant by hiding the truth. Our races were changed from, Indian to mulatto to eventually African American. And we, our community just rode with that. Some communities decided not to ride with that. And around the 1950s, they decided to fight back and they stood up. Our community was, 30 years later, and decided to fight back and stand up. And, by then, our people had lost who they were. They didn't know who they were. And so that's what we're trying to do, is re-engage people to understand who they are, where they came from, try not to lose that. Even in this society where everybody is considered, you've always heard this is a melting pot, and they're trying to take away individualism or individuality. And I think that is so important, because when you take away individuality, you kind of take away like the things that your parents taught you or what made you unique. And so I kind of want people to not forget where they came from, or their ancestors, or how they fought to, protect the earth, or how they fought to protect their community, because it's dividing, right? When we start to lose who we are and what makes us unique, and we all become one, we lose our culture and our people, and we lose that sense of community. And so, we've taken on this role of education and, fighting against the Mountain Valley Pipeline, because, ultimately this does affect us, right? Like, it's going to affect our water. And we genuinely want people to know, even people who are for the pipeline and people who are against the pipeline, the health impacts that it will have on you. And the same with this compressor station that you guys now have in Chatham County, or Pittsylvania County in Chatham, Virginia. You have 2 air compressor stations that produce these pollutants that, are shot off in the air. And, of course, the company is going to say it's safe, because they value profit over people, and they really don't care, right? Because they're not living there and they're not breathing it. But our people who are there now are being affected, right? Like, you have asthma and you have COPD and, just all of these weird health problems that you can't explain. And they don't know how it affects unborn children or youth growing up in the long run, because there's been no studies about this, how to address this problem. And, in my testimony that I gave back in December to the Air Board hearing, there's never going to be an EPA study, because it's not enough people in the community to warrant a study, right, in the immediate vicinity of those air compressor stations. So that's a loophole that these pipeline companies and compressor stations can get by. And, I want Jason to talk about what is the American Indian movement, because it was very strong in the 1970s and it kind of fizzled out because of, governmental influences and a disinformation campaign. The same thing about, strong civil rights. When Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, they thought that they had killed the civil rights movement. And, for a minute, there was chaos, and there was a lot of people who were doing performance activism, as I like to call it. And you had a lot of people who were only in it for the show. And then, come to find out that later in life, they really saw what the bad things that they ended up doing, right, in the name of creating a namesake recognition. And so, Jason, can you talk about the American Indian movement? Just briefly tell people what that is.
American Indian movement, just like the civil rights or Black liberation movement, was a spiritual movement, and it was just a bunch of indigenous folks. A couple of them were out of prison. A couple of them were just in communities, urban communities, and saw the racism that was happening. I think their first act was a Native American got jumped outside of a bar, and in self-defense, he used a knife to get out of there. And they were just trying to throw the book at him, and they knew, from a previous thing where it was the other way around, that the white guy with a knife would have never have served even a day for killing a native. And so they stood up for it, stood up against it. And then other tribes and elders started calling them to their community to get help with their injustices. And so what I do want to say about it is that these are all spiritual movements, just like Dr. King's movement. They didn't really, I would say that Dr. King didn't see himself as a leader. More so, he saw himself as a servant, servant for the people, as he'd be away from his family and in a jail cell. Several people that were arrested with him would talk about how he'd be praying for all the other people in there, even if the people in there had nothing to do with being in there from the marching. You know, he'd be praying for the poor people that were just stuck in there. And so, you know, this is kind of, we got to tap into the wisdom of those that came before us. We got to tap into not feeling comfortable with the way that they've kind of silenced justice action in this country. They kind of give you a media illusion that everything is all good and it's all in the past. And as we know from last summer, George Floyd and so many other recorded actions last year, it's not in the past. It is not in the past. And so that's why we do this work.
So we only have about 15 minutes left, and we do want to talk about some quotes. I just kind of want to talk a little bit about Dr. King, and just trying to reflect about how we're going to bring this community together, right? I've heard from one of our friends that you may have gotten some letters from the MVP saying they want to change the date or push back this easements, right? That you guys are being directly affected. And we all know that it's going to take a community. So the people who are directly affected by the pipeline and these easements, there's also people who are indirectly, like your neighbors or people in your community, who are going to also feel these effects, right? Like they're going to feel the health effects from this pipeline. And we're just here to educate. And, you know, I wasn't around 50 or 60 years ago when the Williams Transco compressor plant was there, because best you believe, if I was, we would have been out here fighting that too, because again, it doesn't matter what your skin color is, cancer or illnesses or disease, it doesn't discriminate. And people have to be aware of these health impacts of what's happening. I know people are saying, well, what about, energy and how we're going to survive? And, we've survived this long without destroying the earth, and being like, I don't know, mosquitoes on Mother Earth, right? Pumping out what needs to be in the ground. We have to continue. We live in such a technologically advanced society that I don't understand why we have to rely on these fossil fuels or things. Like there's the sun. Have we not learned how to harness the sun power, right? Solar energy. Or there's the wind, right? One of the 4 elements. Have we not learned how to harness and capture wind? Like wind is continuously blowing, right? And there are things that
so just to add, the truth is we have learned all that. The science is there. They just can't make the money hand over fist as fast, and they don't want that easement to your bills, right? So if you were able to harness those things, there'd be a lot lower bills that you were paying to the energy industries in your neighborhoods. So this is not a matter of we can't figure out how to do it. It's a matter of it's been suppressed, so they can make maximum profit off the system. So if we have a stand in our mind, in our body, in our spirit, that we no longer hurt the earth, we no longer disrupt her, it'll actually benefit in our favor economically, because it will force us to use the things that have been proven and suppressed information for many, many decades.
So on this day, Dr. King reminded us that we have a duty to uphold our founding ideals, to work to perfect our community, right? And he did this through bus boycotts, restaurant sit-ins, freedom rides, and marches. And the movement that Dr. King helped lead used a lot of nonviolent protest and civil disobedience, right, to call for justice. And we have to live up to his legacy. And again, like Jason said, like he didn't really see himself as a leader, right? He saw himself as a servant to the people. And so that's what we all are. We are servants to our people, to our community. We hold each other accountable. We keep us safe in the community, right? And that is us working in unison, white, black, and indigenous. So here's a few quotes that we pulled together that we thought that would help our communities heal. So from his 1956, The Most Durable Power sermon, let no man pull you so low as to hate him. Jason, you want to read?
If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. From his April 1960 address at Spelman College.
The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of convenience and comfort, but where he stands at the times of challenge and controversy. From his 1963 book, Strength is Love.
Strength to love. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. From Strength to Love.
From his I Have a Dream speech, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. From his April 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail.
Hate is too great a burden to bear. I have decided to love. From his 1967 Where Do We Go From Here address.
We must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. From his Where Do We Go From Here address.
There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because conscience tells him it's right. From his February 1968, A Proper Sense of Priority speech.
We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. From the 2002 Coretta Scott King edited book, In My Own Words.
So again, living up to his legacy, we and what Dr. King believed our nation could become requires more than just this reflection that we're talking to you today. It requires action, right? Like it requires action in our communities. We have to start working together, and we must strive to achieve not just political equality, but also economic justice, right? Because I truly feel that when we work in our communities and we understand what's happening, and then we work in communities that are outside of our communities, because they're just extended sister communities of our communities, right? They're just our neighbors down the street. We can, understand what's happening, right? Like how to earn a decent living. Our students can be educated safely, don't have to worry about, things coming in to, kill them. The people who are sick can get quality healthcare, right? Like how many times have people been not able to get the medicines they need to help save their life? Help the poor, right? Climb out of poverty. And rural poor looks very different from city poor, right? We grew up very modest. We had a farm. Well, we had a small farm. We had crops. And so we were able to feed our family from the winter and the summer because we learned how to save and store food. And then we hunted food on the land. But, when people like Jason, who lived in the city poor is very different. And then finally, the elderly, we have a very big population that's moving toward elderly. And, you can have dignity, and then everyone in America can live without discrimination or fear. And so whenever people talk about discrimination, they only see it as racial, but they don't see that people discriminate against whether you're poor or rich. And people who think they're rich, they're not, right? Young and old.
All differences have been exploited to divide.
Right. And so we have to come across this aisle and just start understanding that deep down, we're right. We are in this together, but when you pull back these layers of what keeps us apart, we all have the same problems, right? And, it all starts with protecting the earth, right? Because again, like I would like to have my legacy live on in my children and grandchildren and great grandchildren. And that is what's important, right? Family is what is important. So, Jason, do you have any final words?
I just want to say that we will be having a more regular presence on here. I see the value of spreading this message of love as I'm reading it from Dr. King's words. There's not enough of those messages going around. It's not something that our folks need to hear once a week or once a month. They need to have this expression of love show up somewhere in their day, every day. It's how we've lost community. It's how we've lost unity. It's how we've lost solidarity. When these movements were strong and rich, Black Liberation Movement, American Indian Movement, all of these movements, almost every oppressed culture had their own organization and grassroots folks doing this work. And I guarantee you, from my uncles and my parents' wisdom and experience in those movements, there was an expression of love every day to keep the people from getting weathered and wore out from this uphill battle. And so if it's the weathering and wearing out that keeps you from this uphill battle, use my wife and I as a resource, reach out to us. We've been practicing giving that expression of love daily to all of those that have been with us in this, just in the one struggle against MVP. And that's just one struggle that we're in this whole collection of oppressions that we face. With that, I'll bid you farewell to the day and go out there and have a wonderful day, inspire others, uplift others, be the example, and thank you for coming here.
And finally, just one thing. So please mark your calendars for February the 12th. We'll be in Danville, Virginia. We'll be having a community education event. We'll be partnering with the Pittsylvania County NAACP, the Alamance County Environmental Justice Committee NAACP. And we're also working with organizers in Rockingham to educate the community. So we will be talking about how to build a more cohesive community and fight these environmental oppressors that are coming. So, if you're a farmer, we invite you to come. If you're just a landowner or you're just living in the area, and I'm talking about Danville, Virginia, Pittsylvania County, Martinsville, Virginia, Alamance County, Caswell County, Person County, Rockingham County, anybody in this area that's like, 100-mile radius, please come and join us. We will have food and, who knows what we may do. So thank you for listening to Yay Fi Rising on WKBY Inspirational Radio. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.